Well, we're about a year out from Seattle coming in, so I might as well spitball things that aren't going to happen. Keep in mind, of course, we're in the midst of everything being shut down. This NHL logo here that represents Seattle. Get a name, Seattle. Um, and these, of course, are brand new magnets I made. There's a matching game that you can get on Amazon I've been looking at for a while, and I thought those will probably make pretty good magnets. And yeah, they do. And I got two of them. I also got one for our daughter so that she can go through and do the match thing, and then she'll know the team name and the logo, and she'll have all that figured out. It works. It's one thing I learned when I was a kid. So, trying to figure out scheduling, and I'm going to throw out there something that people may or may not know. Back, way, way, way back. In the 80s, I was desperate enough to want to see the Canucks win, this team here, back when they had the skate logo, that I made up my own hockey league that the Canucks could win in. And this was before EA sports games and all that stuff. And so, I made up a league. Of course, I had myself in it. Who wouldn't? So before you had the vanity projects in EA sports games, I was way ahead of that curve. And I would come up with my own schedule. I started out just using the NHL schedule. So I would get the NHL yearbooks and I would just use their schedule, and I used all the same teams. But as the years went on, I started coming up with my own ideas for schedules. Now, the NHL's about to reach where the league that I had created was back in, I want to say, 98, 97, 98. So it's over 20 years ago, and I had to kind of try to remember how I had the schedule. I had a schedule the last year I had it where all 32 teams played at the same, like on the same days. There was no such thing as games in hand. Didn't happen. And the way that I achieved this was to split it all into fours. And so I split it all into fours. And I had game one, game two, game three. And what it was basically, let's say Buffalo's going to meet Ottawa and Toronto's going to meet Montreal. Those games will happen on the same days, because I will just have it scheduled. So the way I scheduled it was, and I do believe this is accurate, I had teams against these groups that I had in fours 6 times in any given season. The rest of the division they played 4 times, so you can rotate that from year to year. Maybe Buffalo plays Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal 4 times or 6 times, the other teams 4 times, or you rotate it however you want. And then the rest of the league they played twice. So 34 out of 82 games are inside the division. Every divisional game matters. And what it does is it cuts down on travel costs. So you could have back-to-back nights of divisional matchups. You're going to have some intense hockey there. And then you might have a couple of days off in between. This is where people might say, oh, you're never going to see the NHL agree to that. I know, it's just, I'm throwing that out there. But if you're going to play against the other conference, you're going to have a bit of a break before then. Or you might have, let's say for Vancouver, they're going to go and play in Toronto. You have 1 day off. Maybe for Florida, it's 2 days off. That kind of thing, depending on the travel. And yeah, I would actually sit down and figure it all out. And I made it so that it was actually a pretty easy schedule. One thing that you can do with 32 teams, it's a really nice round number. We're finally at a nice round number in the NHL for the first time since, I want to say, 24. I think at 26 or 28, your scheduling still going to involve some even or odd numbers. And what I don't like about odd numbered series is, like if you're going to see Dallas and Nashville, so for instance, playing each other 3 times, that means one of them will have home ice twice and the other one will have home ice once. I'm not a huge fan of that, to be honest. I like even numbers. That's why for me it's 6, 4, and 2. And I like the idea of the divisional games being more important. Now, one thing that I'm wondering is, now when I did the playoffs, I had it where there was crossover, right? So think like the World Championships, where you have Group A and Group B, and then team number 1 in Group A plays team number 4 in Group B. Now, where that gets kind of dicey is if I'm going to have a schedule where 34 games are played inside the division, it's important that those divisional matchups then are rewarded and paid off in the playoffs. So let's just say you have 1 in the Central versus 4 in the Atlantic, and then maybe you pair it off, or not Central, sorry, Metro. So Metro versus Atlantic, and then 2 in the Atlantic versus 3 in the Metro. you might get 2 Metro teams against each other in round 2. So you'd have full-on crossovers in that first round, and then you might get better playoffs in the second round. We all complain all the time about playoffs. Just say, I'll just go back to 1 versus 8. People complained during the 1 versus 8 era. I'm not sure why people look at that now and see it as the gold standard. I'm not sure. I think that the setup we have now where it's 1 through 3 in a division and 2 wildcards, I think that's actually fairer in some instances than what we had before. Now, one thing the NHL could do as well is once you have 32 teams, if you play all 31 teams that you have in the league, that's 62 games right there. So we're almost to the point where the NHL, let's say they eventually go to 40. One rumor that was out there a few years ago, I haven't heard it as much over the last couple of years, but one rumor was the NHL would eventually go to 40 teams. They were the league that went, you know what, we can just expand this to 40. We can do it. Whichever league goes beyond 32 teams first, I don't necessarily think that's the end of the world. Of course, if you're a fan in Vancouver, Buffalo, Toronto, wherever, a team that hasn't had a lot of success in the playoffs, it gets harder and harder, right? Because now there's even more teams you're up against, and the odds of you getting to a finals and or winning, it becomes a lot more difficult. 32 teams is kind of perfect. 40 teams is kind of ridiculous. I agree with that. I think if you went to 40 teams, you'd have to have just Western teams against each other and just Eastern teams against each other. But I also remember when we just had one game between, say, Boston and Vancouver in any given season, and you just rotate who had home ice one year versus the other. Fans hated that. Fans in Vancouver didn't like the idea of only seeing Montreal every 2 years. The NHL could get really creative. I know they're not going to, but they could. You could have a Canadian division. That was talked about years and years and years ago. Could the NHL eventually want a Canadian division? And the talk at the time was that GMs and owners of teams in the States, some of their lowest attended games were ones that involved some of the Canadian teams. And they were kind of like, if we didn't see the Canadian teams as much. And meanwhile, Canadian organizations were like, hey, we get great gate receipts for those Canadian teams. You get Toronto coming to Vancouver, it's fantastic. If we had more games between them, that'd be to the benefit of the league. The easiest decision that they made was that when Seattle comes in, Arizona goes to the Central. And Arizona went to the Central instead of Vegas because Vegas said no. And they had more sway than did Arizona. And yes, that happens not this coming season, but the year after. So we will still see 7 teams in the Central until next year. Now, I did try to put these in an order that I think makes sense. Now, it gets interesting because let's say you have Vegas with the 3 California teams. That works for a group of 4. Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, and Seattle. That works as a group of 4. And then every other division, it's kind of depends. So you'd have Winnipeg, Minnesota, Chicago, St. Louis. Like, you can't have Chicago and St. Louis not be the rivals playing each other 6 times. You just couldn't. And then Nashville, Dallas, Arizona, and Colorado. So you'd have 3 teams that are southern, and then you have Colorado in there as well, and they're kind of in the middle. And then St. Louis, I think, is further south than Denver. But right, so this gets kind of sketchy. I would love to see the NHL come up with a system that gets rid of games in hand as much as possible. And one thing that I could do when I was making up my own schedule that you can't do at the NHL is I didn't have to worry about building availability. I didn't have to worry about what day of the week any of these games were on. I didn't have to worry about TV contracts. I didn't have to worry about all the ticket sales and any of that. I just went, okay, this works. This schedule works. And I could just go with it. And I didn't have to worry about fan backlash because it's just for myself and for my own amusement. I do wonder if the NHL coming out of this shutdown, there's been talk of them expanding the playoffs and doing a best of 3 and a best of 5 and a best of 7 and messing around with it. And maybe you have a bye into the second round. And you have a wild card. As a guy who I consider myself kind of a hockey traditionalist, it might be kind of fun to see the NHL just do something different. Do something different. As much as I'm opposed to expanding the playoffs, there's a part of me saying, but why? Why am I opposed to expanding the playoffs? What am I scared of? Am I scared that a team that's 20th overall in the NHL is going to win the Stanley Cup? Then why don't we just have the top 8 make the playoffs? Like, if we were so worried about the integrity of the game, where was that back in the 80s when 16 out of 21 teams made the playoffs? It wasn't about integrity then. It was about playoff gates. It was about every team feeling like they had a chance, even though that really wasn't the case, which the NHL seems to be in favor of because we have the 3-point game. Now, of course, when I had my league, I did away with the extra point altogether. There was wins, there was losses, and that was it. And there was no overtime loss point, and I didn't care. So it looked so nice. It looked so nice to see a team is 50-32 and another one's 46-36. And, that looked so nice, but the NHL will never do that. They'll never go to a basketball-style record. The one thing that Tim McAuliffe tweeted out yesterday, that I think it was yesterday or the day before, that if he was commissioner, he'd make it so it was 10-minute overtimes, and he doesn't care if you have to lose the shootout to make it happen. I don't mind that idea. I know it will never happen, but it's a bold decision. And I do wonder if the NHL and the NHLPA might come to something rather bold out of this. We've talked about player tracking through the pucks and sensors on the players. Why not change things up? And I know they won't. This is just one of those, hey, wouldn't it be cool if kind of videos. There are those that'll say Shannon just wants to show off his new magnets. Who knows what's true in this video? The reality is that once we get to 32 teams, it becomes really, really easy to schedule things out. And if the NHL tries, they could make it so that you could have all 32 teams play regularly. It makes it difficult for me as a guy who tries to watch as much hockey as possible. But you could have on Saturday and on Sunday, every Saturday and Sunday, all 32 teams are in action both days. And make it so that the weekends are really must-see television when it comes to your hockey. And maybe you have all 32 teams in action on a Wednesday or on a Thursday as well. Now, if you do it Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, that's where you have 3 games in 4 nights, but then everybody's doing it. See, the idea of scheduling it so everybody plays the same night and that you try to make that happen regularly is to get rid of my team has 10 3 games in 4 nights stints, and yours only has 5, so we're more tired. You guys have that East Coast swing. We don't, it's just to try to make it as fair as possible. And also to add to some fun. So if you had, 4 teams, if you had 4-team divisions, question that was asked on the live stream was, could you see them going to 4-team divisions? I can't see it. I think that would cause too many problems because you would have divisions where maybe you end up with a team that has, an absolute crap record that wins their division and goes to the playoffs. But if you expand the playoffs, you can make it work. So let's say you have 4-team divisions, but 12 teams in each conference are going to make the playoffs. The only one that's assured of a playoff spot is the winner of the division, and you don't get a perfect seeding. So if you don't have it that your division winner is necessarily the team that gets a top 4 seeding in their conference, maybe it's just you make the playoffs. So let's say the Islanders win their division, but there's 7 teams with a better record. They're now the number 8 seed. That kind of thing. And we'll see what they do. But again, it's probably just going to stay all the same. But with this shutdown, does this allow them to do something creative when they come back? Are there going to be guys who might be general managers, owners, maybe people in the upper echelon of NHL management in general who say, I've wanted to see something more fun. We had a real big shakeup. We looked at 2004, 2005. We lose that whole season. The NHL shook things up when they came back. They opened up the game. They were able to do that because we lost a whole season, and we as fans wanted to see some changes, and they made the right changes. Could the NHL do that? Could we see big rule changes come about as a result of the shutdown that we're in and the fact that this is going to impact not just this year, it's going to impact next season as well? These are the kinds of things I think about in between videos. These are the kinds of things that I think about when I'm laying trying to go to sleep at night. I do end up thinking about hockey quite often, and this is an interesting topic to me. I'd be interested to know what you guys think. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. And here's the question. Could we do like a major revamp of scheduling and of playoffs and make it so that maybe there's more teams in it and make it so that if you're a wild card, it's more difficult to move forward. Maybe it's a best of 3 wild card and all 3 games would be played in the city of the team that's got the higher seeding. Something like that. But let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. And on behalf of my brand new magnets, thank you guys again. And remember, stay home where you can. If you're in an area where you can do that, stay safe as much as possible right now during this time. Beautiful out there right now. I understand, people wanting to be outside. I do go out and make sure the sun's still there and there's still air and things are still existing. But yeah, remember to stay safe, and thanks for all your support throughout this. It means a ton as this channel's past 138,000 subscribers. It's sort of been above and below, but I know it'll eventually push its way forward again. And it's understandable that there's a lot less people thinking about hockey right now, so I can do a video like this, talk to all you fine people today on a Sunday, and I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you guys for all your support. I will talk to you again very soon.